Welcome to Divorcing Strong, the podcast that pulls no punches when it comes to divorce. I'm Becky Sampson, better known as Bulldog Becky Brockovich, and I'm here to give you the straight talk, the strategies, and the subpoena secrets you won't hear anywhere else. With expert guests and proven advice, you'll learn your rights, your options, and gain your power that encourages a fair and equitable outcome. Divorce doesn't have to break you. It can build you. Let's get to it. Hi, and welcome to the Divorcing Strong. I'm Becky Sampson. I'm the host of the show today, and we have a very special guest, Ryan Gregerson. He is a family law attorney here in the state of Utah. So Ryan started his firm to inspire others to transform their trials and build their best lives. He's brought together an amazing team of Utah attorneys with exceptional trial skills to advocate for clients and help negotiate beneficial settlements for them. RCG Law Group has represented thousands of individuals in divorce and family law cases, estate planning, and business law. Ryan knows and can empathize with those going through divorce and cares about clients and building for the future. And I'm excited to have him on the show because he has been divorced and he is remarried now. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So I want to welcome you to the show, Ryan. Thank you for joining today.
Thanks for having me, Becky. I'm really excited to be able to visit with you and talk with you. I know you're doing some great things for people and bringing some great content and education for those kind of going through divorce.
Yeah. And I appreciate, it's interesting. I always say that the people in this space, in the divorce space, are usually not just in this for the fun of it. We've all kind of been through our own experiences before, and that's what makes us passionate about helping other people. So just before kind of getting started, tell us kind of the backstory of what got you to this point and actually even getting into law and then helping people in this space.
Yeah, so it's great questions. Something I kind of enjoy talking about, honestly, because it goes way back for me. Mm-hmm. And I was actually just having this conversation with some of my leadership team when we did a little retreat about 2 weeks ago. So for me, it was the eighth grade. I was eighth grade history class, actually, is what got me wanting to be a lawyer. My history teacher, Mr. Coyle, he did a mock trial, the Dred Scott case, and he assigned me to be an attorney.
Wow.
And I had the opportunity to advocate for Dred Scott, who, it's a really famous case. Basically, he'd been a slave in the South, had come to the North and to be emancipated. And then they tried to take him back down to the South and still force him to be a slave. And so I got to advocate for him and I was hooked. The second that I did that and dove in and got to do direct examination and cross-examination, I just thought, this is the stuff for me.
Was that like mock trial or something? Like when?
Yeah, it was mock trial.
Okay, yeah, I was going to say that's what they do in high school. That's cool.
Yeah, little eighth grade Ryan doing a mock trial, and I was hooked. I absolutely was like, that's what I'm going to do. And so it was kind of like my path from there was just always going to be that I was going to go to law school. Mm-hmm. So when I went to undergrad, it was just, hey, what major can I be that's going to be, relatively easy, but get me kind of prepped for law school. So I decided to be a business major when I went to undergrad, thinking, hey, if I ever run a law firm, which I am, then I want to learn about business and do that. So that kind of led me on the pathway to law school. And I chose Baylor Law School, which is down in Texas, because they do litigation. I knew I wanted to be in court. I was really passionate about being in court. And they're a really great litigation school. And so
that's not normal, by the way, for most people, right? They don't want to go to litigation. I guess sometimes people live for that. But if you don't know what litigation is, it's basically going straight to court and fighting whatever for your clients. But yeah, that's kind of interesting that you would want to go that route. But
yeah, it was, I've always liked performing too. I did a little bit of theater.
Okay.
And so I love the idea of what that was, to like craft an argument and perform and present and try to, convince a jury or a judge of something. And so what's really interesting about family law is I remember very distinctly on the first day of law school that in our civil procedure class, that the professor stood up one of the students, one of my fellow classmates, and kind of asked her what it was that she wanted to do after law school. Because, at this stage, you're just starting law school. You don't necessarily know, but she was like, I want to do family law. And I can remember thinking like, I never want to do that. Yeah. I don't know why she would want to be in family law. Yeah. That's the worst idea I've ever heard. And it just like, for some reason that stuck with me, that that's what she had wanted to do. And it was the farthest thing from my thoughts. And so I get done with law school. I'm thinking I'm going to be doing, personal injury or some other kind of civil litigation. But fortunately, I graduated in 2009. 2009 was not a great time for jobs in general, and the economy, certainly not a great time for legal jobs. And so I ended up just doing what I could find. I was studying for the bar. I needed to get some extra cash. So I was a clerk for a local attorney in town who was a solo. Did mostly employment law, dabbled in family law, like just this much. And she hated it. So I'm her law clerk. And so she would give me things and she's like, hey, go figure this out. Like, go do this divorce, go do this custody case. So there I'm this like law clerk studying for the bar, trying to figure out how to do some family law
navigate
stuff.
through that. Was it mainly divorce that you were working with at that point, or was it family cases?
It was mostly just the divorce stuff that she had. And it was not that many cases. It was just a few things she was having me do, kind of figure stuff out, because it was kind of like part-time work that summer. It was only for a few months. And then I, took the bar. And then at that point in time, I ended up actually getting a job as a prosecutor for about a year.
Oh, really?
And did that, which was great, right? Super rewarding. You're the good guy, right? You're putting away bad guys. It was at a justice court here, though. And so I was mostly like DUIs and domestic violence. That was like almost exclusively what it was that I did. And, but I knew I wanted to be at a law firm. And so when I had an opportunity to interview at a law firm here in town, I did. And they actually hired me to help them with bankruptcy, even though I didn't know anything about bankruptcy. It's 2010 at the time, and bankruptcies were huge, right? Tons of bankruptcies being filed. And so I start there, and they'd had a partner leave, and he did family law. So I didn't have anybody that did family law. And they saw that on my resume, that I did it at this, as a law clerk for this attorney in town. And they said, hey, we want you to take these family law cases if they come in. And I'm a new associate. Like, this is my first law firm job. I'm like, hey, whatever you say, I'm going to do anything, right? You say jump, I say how high. So I start taking some cases here and there and just trying to figure them out. And really quickly, I figured out that family law brought a lot of the things to my plate that I found rewarding. Certainly, I got to go to court, and family law attorneys get to go to court as much as any attorneys, right? But it also gave me the opportunity exposure to mediation, which I found to be extremely satisfying, right? In mediation, you're involved in this process of problem solving, of trying to take all these different moving parts and all these different emotions that people are experiencing, and what their priorities are and what their goals are, and trying to fit this puzzle together in a way that will work for both parties, that both parties can say at the end of that session, like, yes, I can live with this. Yes, I can come to this agreement. And I loved it. I loved problem solving, crafting solutions in a mediation session.
And mediation, people, and I don't think you know this about me, but I got my degree in peace building, mediation, and conflict resolution. So I got to be a trained mediator as well. And it's really a game of putting those pieces together, right? Like finding out those common beliefs and values that they have, and be able to come together. And I found it to be quite challenging at times, but also, like you said, rewarding, to be able to bring people together. And that's something that, people don't have to go to court in divorce. That's one thing that I found that they don't really understand, that they don't have to go to court. They can use mediation. Is that one of the tools that you use also when you're working with people going through divorce?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big believer that if people can avoid having to go to court, they should. Now, it doesn't mean that you just take an absolutely horrible deal to do it, right? There are certain times where there's just not a lot of choice you have, right? Like the cases that I've most frequently had to go to trial over are relocation cases, because it really is an all or nothing. There's not a lot of common ground, right? Either the kids are going to go with the person relocating or going to stay where they're at. And so it's hard to come to resolution. But most other cases, people are better off if they can come to a resolution, right? Especially when it involves kids, especially when you're going to have these parties co-parenting going forward, right? If we can minimize the fight in court, then hopefully they can have a better co-parenting relationship. And that's one of the things that I started getting really passionate about as I did more and more of these family law cases, which is, if I can help people reach good, fair resolutions, it's better off for the kids. And so then it became like, I'm really kind of advocating for the kids. I'm trying to find solutions that I believe are going to direct my client in a way that's going to benefit their kids, so they can have better lives, so they can grow up, more well-adjusted and have better chance of success in their future life, right? Like, it's very clear in talking with a lot of different marriage and family therapists, right? The factors that will affect how well kids do after divorce and or not divorce, right? How do they end up playing out? And the factor is really not like, do kids come from a household that wasn't divorced or was divorced, right? If you only look at that factor, it's skewed. If you layer in one additional factor that tells the tale, and that factor is the level of conflict between the parents.
Right.
And if the level of conflict is low, if they come from a married household or divorced household, if the level of conflict between the parents is low, they're going to be fine. They'll be well adjusted. They'll be successful. You throw in that factor of conflict, then it's whether or not it was a married household, a lot of conflict, or a divorced household, a lot of conflict. That's where you see things really start to devolve. The statistics are very, very negative on what that effect on those children are, right? It's compounded by the parents being divorced. So if there's high conflict and they're divorced, it's really, really tough for kids. And so that's where I just found a lot of like passion, is trying to find these solutions to keep the level of conflicts low for people so that their kids can be better adjusted.
Yeah. And when you're working with people, what's one of the first things that is that something that you really discuss with your clients when they come to meet with you, is how to eliminate, or not eliminate, I shouldn't say, but to minimize that conflict so that they, especially if they have kids, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, when we're first doing kind of initial consultation with somebody, we always like to find out like what their main goals are. Like, okay, what are your overall goals?
Yeah.
And a lot of people, if they have kids, it's like, I want custody, right? And that's only part of the tale. What we want to start identifying is, okay, what does that look like, right? What does it look like for the other side to have parent time? What does it look like to create a good co-parenting relationship? What does it look like to have good communication so that you guys can get along well? You know, I'm a big believer in Bill Eddy's work, right? You're probably, Becky, you're probably familiar with him.
I don't know. Who is Bill Eddy?
Bill Eddy. He's in the space a lot, and he's written a bunch of books, but the first one that he wrote, at least that I was familiar with in this space, it's called BIFF. And BIFF is an acronym. And he came up with this acronym for how you should deal with people with high conflict personalities, right? And so when you have a high conflict personality on the other side of a co-parenting relationship, it was basically a recommendation about how you can navigate that better by using this acronym, which I love. So it's brief, informative, friendly, and firm. And by doing it, it does really help to reduce that level of conflict. And so from the very first, right, if we've got a client who has kids and there's going to be a co-parenting relationship,
right,
we provide that information right out the gate. We provide a recommendation about different steps and things they should do as they're navigating that co-parenting relationship. And we make that recommendation to use BIFF in their communications, right? So that they can have more effective communications. And we just found a lot of success in recommending that to clients and seeing that play out in really positive ways.
Yeah, well, that's a really, really important thing, because communicate. First of all, I talk about this a lot on this show as well, you know, in the coaching is that if you can, especially working with attorneys, right? Because you guys just want facts, right? We don't need a lot of emotion, but people going through divorce are dealing with a lot of emotion. But if we can bring our emotions kind of keep it at bay, and to be able to just focus on what's important and the values that we have, and the things, like you said, the goals that they may have, it makes it a lot easier to navigate with not only through the legal system, but also with the lawyer, and with your soon-to-be former, or ex, I should say.
Yeah, for sure. You know, I think it's interesting because, you know, the emotions that we experience and feel, especially in divorce, are real.
Yep.
And we want people to feel those emotions, right? Not to suppress them, right? They need to feel them. And then there's the transition, right? Like, feel the emotions, experience that, and now take the next step to, okay, what do you do now?
Right.
Do you wallow in those emotions, right? Which can be really negative, right? And not be very helpful. Or can you now say, okay, now I'm going to detach myself from that, and now I'm going to make some decisions, right, that are going to help shape and affect my life and the life of my kids. And that's where it's really important. It's tools and resources to do it, because, you know, we don't just come pre-programmed in how to deal with this when we're born. And when someone's going through divorce, most of the time it's one of the most difficult emotional experiences that they'll face in their whole life. And so they're not probably well equipped to deal with this. And so I think that there's a really important space here where divorce attorneys and people in this space, divorce coaching, those types of things too, can play an important role in helping somebody identify that. Hey, experience the emotions, Now let's move forward and let's make some important decisions there once you've detached yourself from what those emotions are that you're experiencing.
Yeah. When would you, here's a question for you. When do you recommend people hire an attorney, or they don't need an attorney and they can just go through mediation? Or, I mean, what's your suggestion with all of that? Because, I mean, if people, that's the main reason why I'm doing this Divorcing Strong podcast, is because, like you just said a second ago, is that people, when they're hit with this, whatever reason you're that point where now you're needing to get divorced, people don't go to divorce school. They don't know what they don't know. What would be your recommendation of like, okay, what do they do at that beginning stages of like, do I need an attorney? Do I not need an attorney? Like,
yeah, it's a really good question. And, I probably have a somewhat biased answer. I think the majority of the time, if a divorce is going to be involving kids, having the involvement of an attorney is helpful for understanding rights and obligations. But it's a mixed bag, right? If you hire the wrong attorney who is just much more combative, then it doesn't necessarily make the process that much better, right? Maybe you know what your legal rights and obligations are, but then they're pushing you to battle at every turn. And I'm not saying that's most attorneys. In fact, I think it's very few attorneys that do that, but we all know attorneys that absolutely do that. And so you get one of those attorneys, and then it's really counterproductive. Most of the time you get people who are in this space who actually care. You get attorneys who are trying to do the right thing. And when you do, then that advice can become very helpful so that you can make really good, educated, informed decisions. I never want to tell my clients what exactly they should do. What I like to do is provide them the education and then let them make informed decisions for their life, because it's their life and it's not mine.
Yeah.
You do bring up a good point though, which is mediation. I think that there is certainly a space for people to go straight to mediation and not necessarily have an attorney. I haven't done a lot of mediation, but I did go through the mediation training, and there's the occasion where we do have a client who they just want to come in and meet with me as the mediator and as an attorney mediator. If I can help them reach a resolution, then I can draft the documents for them at the end. And we'll do that every once in a while. I know another really great attorney up in Logan, Chris Guyman, who does it all the time, where he mediates a lot of cases for people where they don't want to have a bunch of conflict. They both don't want to have to hire attorneys, and they can work through things, but then they're still getting a little of that information, education, and resources because he's an attorney mediator and can provide that to them. And so, I think every situation is unique. If in doubt, I would visit with an attorney because you're going to get that information, but it doesn't mean that it has to be a fight. And choosing your attorney is as important as choosing who you're going to date, right?
110%. I say that all the time. I'm like, don't marry the first divorce attorney that you meet, because it is just like any other relationship. You have to be able to work with that attorney, and it's like dating, right? You're not just going to like jump into a dating relationship with somebody that you don't know. You've got to build that relationship of trust with your attorney. That is a really good point.
Yeah. And because you're going to have to ultimately too, like, trust him to like tell your entire story and not hide anything from him, right? Like if you got warts in your case, you got to tell them, and you can't be afraid or shy to tell your attorney. You got to, trust them to be vulnerable in those situations so they can understand what's really going on. And so, it's super important to choose the right divorce attorney for you so that you can find the right attorney going to help you reach your goals, right? Identifying what your goals are, helping you to adjust those goals, right? Because initially when we're going through those divorce things, we might think our goal is one thing, right? We want revenge or vengeance for something. A reasonable attorney can help us to, paradigm shift a little bit. Tame it, right? Understand what's really important. Understand what's really going to matter going forward, right? Is it getting that revenge, or is it what's my life going to look like after this divorce and with these kids? And what are my finances going to look like once I get through this stage in my life?
Yeah. Well, and I think so what are some of the questions that you would recommend that if somebody's just starting this process, like what kind of questions should they ask a divorce attorney, or do clients ask you when they're meeting with you that you think would be advantageous for them?
A lot of attorneys or a lot of clients want to understand more about what custody is. A lot of times people will come in with a very like black and white view of what custody is. It's either sole custody or it's 50-50, right? And while those are certainly two options, and two options that do happen, there's a lot more nuance there. Custody is not just a black and white. There's tons of gray because, at least in the state of Utah anyways, joint custodies become more of the norm, more of the standard,
Mm-hmm.
but not necessarily 50-50. There's lots of options and things in between for what custody could look like. And, understanding more about the difference too between what physical custody is versus legal custody, because that also gets a
Mm-hmm.
little bit confusing for people,
Mm-hmm.
right? Well, what is that all about? So we get lots of questions about that, trying to understand what custody is, what it looks like, how things like holidays and stuff interact with weekends, and vacation time in the summer. So we get that a ton. A lot of times too, what we'll get questions about is the house. One of the most common things we'll get if there's a house in the marriage is, hey, I've heard that if I leave the house, that I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to give up my interest in the house.
Mm-hmm.
And that's of course not true. And yet it's a prevailing thought that we see all the time. So people are very concerned about that, right? If they're
Right.
stuck in this really difficult situation where maybe there's emotional abuse, maybe it doesn't rise to the level of actual domestic violence. We're not looking at
Mm-hmm.
protective order,
Mm-hmm.
but it's still just something they can't stand any longer. But then they're afraid because if they decide to leave the marriage, they think in their heads, because people have told them or something,
Right.
that now they're going to lose all their interest in the home. And
Right.
oftentimes the home is the major asset that the couple
Mm-hmm.
has. And so the thought of losing your major asset is horrible. So they stay in these relationships because they're afraid. So it comes out of fear. So we get questions about that a lot. And then we can educate people about what their actual rights and obligations are when it comes to equity in the home, right? If it's a marital home, no, leaving the house doesn't give up your equity.
Right.
Might affect who ultimately stays in the home, at least in the
Right.
interim, at least on a temporary basis. It might affect that, but you're not going to give up your interest by simply deciding to move out because it's better for your mental health and your kids if you guys do separate. And so we find a lot of questions relating to marital home as well.
Yeah, I actually was just having a conversation with somebody last night. She's been in a relationship, an abusive relationship for many years, and she has no idea. She hasn't had anything to do with the finances for years. She doesn't know where any of the bank accounts are. She doesn't know how to even navigate, like, what does she do? You know what I mean? And what would you suggest in that kind of case? I mean, you can't give legal advice, but somebody in that situation where she doesn't have access to anything and she knows she needs to get out of the situation.
Yeah, it's honestly, it's very common,
Yeah.
especially in the state of Utah. We're starting to catch up with the rest of the nation,
Mm-hmm.
as far as dual income households and things, how frequent and common that is. But we still have a lot of traditional families where you've got a stay-at-home
Yeah.
mom that doesn't look at the finances or doesn't have access to those things. And when those situations happen, I think the thing that potential clients can take some solace in is all that information is going to come out, right? There's
Yeah.
disclosures that are required in a divorce where even if you don't have access to all the bank accounts and the investments and the retirements and all those things, the other side does, and they will have to provide them. And that's going to be true for every state, right? But certainly is true here in Utah. It's required. It's required in the Utah Rules of Civil Procedure. Those disclosures will have to be made, and that information will be discovered. It's tough because in the interim, you don't know. And there's this
Right.
fear of the unknown. Sometimes, too, we'll find that somebody doesn't have access to resources to even be able to retain in the first place. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where it's tough,
Mm-hmm.
right? If the other side is locked them out entirely, never gives them an allowance, right? We see that happen sometimes.
Yep.
You only get this allowance and it's a few $100 a month. How they can afford a retainer that's $4 or $5 or $6 or $7,000 can become very difficult. When clients are able to find those ways to do it, whereas friends or family or you even see sometimes these GoFundMe accounts to get your retainer. Once that happens, once an attorney can be retained, and then you can force those disclosures to happen.
Yeah.
And when there's a major disparity in income too, Utah provides at times the ability to have the other side pay for attorney's
Exactly.
fees. Then suddenly it starts to bring a little bit of relief, right? A little
Yeah.
bit
And that's
de-stress.
and that is something, I mean, every state is different, right? But that's something that a lot of people don't know, is that you can ask the court for financial relief while you're going through the divorce and having the other side pay for that. Now, whether the court gives it to you or not is a whole nother, you don't know, right? But for a lot of these people that don't have the resources and they're thinking, how in the world do I get the help in order to retain an attorney? That is one of the options, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the other misnomers we see a lot relating to that is the idea of what's in those bank accounts, right? That
Mm-hmm.
oh, if the other side is the one that it's their names on or they have access to it, it means it's not mine.
Yep.
And it's this major misnomer because generally speaking, I mean, if the money in those accounts has come from work that the other party did during the marriage, it's marital money
asset
in the state of Utah,
Yep.
right? It's a marital asset. And so it's like, okay, maybe the other side's going to have to pay fees with their ongoing income they're making, or maybe it's just that now we've got to get access to what those funds already are because those are already marital. It's this really common misconception in the state of Utah that like, oh, well, I made the money and so it's mine. I paid the payment on this or that, so it's mine. And the reality is if you make money in the state of Utah during marriage, that money is marital.
Yeah.
And so if you're paying on some kind of asset or you're putting money away into a bank account, highly likely that that's all going to be marital, which means it's subject to a division and usually an equal division.
Yeah.
The state of Utah says equitable, but it's usually equal.
And that is something I have found as well, is that people don't understand, even if they haven't seen that money or they don't have access to it, it is still marital assets, like you just said. So, and there is that division, right, of look, all the information needs to be disclosed, and if not, subpoenas. That was one of the things that I used in my case to win my case, is just to get all the information out on the table. And I always say to people, I'm like, just because they're trying to hide marital assets doesn't mean it's hidden, right? So there's
very true, and subpoenas can play a vital role
huge.
in that. If somebody's not willing to disclose that information up front, even though the rules require them to, you have to resort to what your legal remedies are. And one of those is, let's get some subpoenas issued, right? Subpoenas can go a long way into gathering and getting the information that the other side otherwise is just not willing to provide or trying to hide or trying to keep from somebody. And there's avenues to get it.
Yeah.
The subpoenas are a great one.
I know. Well, they're my secret weapon. I am one, I don't know, Ryan, I mean, because we didn't talk a whole lot before, but I really do believe in a fair and equitable division. I mean, it's not something that a lot of people understand. I have found, at least, that they don't understand that. And I always say, if they don't know their rights, then they don't have any rights. So it's really important. That's one of the things working with an attorney, because you guys know what the rights are for the individual. And then you can go, okay, here's your choices. Like one of the things my husband now, he's amazing. However, he was married for 27 and a half years and his wife left him with 21 cents in the bank. And I'm always for, if that's what you're okay settling for, then that's fine. But at least know your rights so that you know what your decisions can be made, what decisions can be made for a fair and equitable division. And that's what I find a lot of people in this space just have no idea what the rights are.
Yeah. And that's one of the things too, that sometimes you have to debunk as an attorney when you're visiting with a client for the first time, is their view of what fair is might be off. Because a lot of times people will say that, right? Like, look, I just want what's fair. They'll come in my office, we'll sit here and talk, and I just want what's fair. And while I don't have any reason to disbelieve them, what I do see, though, is what their view or vision of what fair is vastly different than the other side. And both of those views might be entirely different than what the law actually is.
Right.
And so it's super helpful to have the education and information to know, okay, what is the law on equitable division? What is the law on how these things are going to play out in retirements and house and accounts and alimony and all these things? Now, with the law as the basis, now figuring out what's fair will be quite a bit easier, because you know what the law is and how that situation is likely to play out. Because without the proper education and information, people's view of fair is vastly different most of the time.
Yeah. So talk to a little bit about that, because fair and equitable, I mean, people don't realize that everything's negotiable. So every situation, just because the law says this doesn't mean that you can create your own agreement, what's fair for both of you, and get to that point. So talk about, like, because really you don't want it to get to trial, because then the judge decides what that fair and equitable is versus you as a spouse and having families. So talk a little bit about that and how you get people.
And if you do go to trial too, one of the issues is not only is it going to be this person who doesn't really care about your life, because that's not their job, they're also not going to get creative at all.
No.
it's just going to be like, well, for the most part, it's just straight down the middle, and everything is straight down the middle, which might be super inconvenient for it to be straight down the middle. And so when you do negotiate, I always like to look at it as the backdrop of, well, what's likely to happen at trial if the law is followed, right? And the basic facts that we have now, with that as a backdrop, now where can we get you, Mr. or Mrs. Client, to the point where it works for you in meeting your goals, knowing that's the backdrop of what could well happen at trial? What's more important to you versus what's less? Let me give you an example. So a couple of weeks ago, we did a mediation, and there's a disparity in income in this particular marriage. And so alimony was certainly on the table. We had a couple of pieces of real property, which had some equities. We had some good assets to deal with. Ultimately, what these parties decided through this mediation, a really skilled mediator was doing it, was that a lump sum for alimony met both parties' needs better that would get paid out of one of the pieces of real property when it was sold. It was to be sold. And it met the needs because the payor, the potential payor of alimony, didn't want to be paying alimony for a long time, right? It's a very long-term marriage. Didn't want to be doing that for a long time. The other side didn't want to be held captive. Like, well, I don't feel like I could ever go look for another relationship because I'm going to be so reliant on what this alimony is. And if I don't have a lot of money otherwise, I don't want that to end, but I, can't go cohabit. Right. So now I'm going to always be subject to this. It was like finding one of those things that the court would not have done. The court would not have issued a lump sum alimony payment. It was deeply discounted from the full amount, right? But it was paid now and was a sure thing. Never would have done that. But the parties were able to come together and find unique solutions because we had the backdrop of what could happen. We knew what the possibilities were. Then we could get creative to find a win-win for these parties, which in that case we did. And I think it worked out great. I think it really was one of those win-win situations in that particular issue.
Yeah. Well, and again, I mean, when you do that before it goes to trial, you have that right to make it creative. I mean, it sounds like you're a deal maker. Really, that's what a good attorney is able to look at, and it's very risky going to trial. Very risky.
It is. Yeah. Because the other thing too is sometimes you'll have some attorneys say, or some people say well, I know for sure what's going to happen at trial. It's going to be X, Y, or Z. And the reality is we know what the law is. We know what a lot of times happens, but we also know that the court gets it wrong sometimes. And that's no knock on the judiciary. I think the state of Utah, I think our judiciary is great. I think we've got a ton of really great commissioners and judges that really are trying to do the right thing, but they still get it wrong, right? People still get it wrong. There's a reason why we have the appellate courts. There's a reason why we have the Supreme Court, because they get it wrong. And then it has to get fixed by a higher court. I mean, every year we have a myriad of cases that are overturning what the district court had done because they simply got it wrong. And so it's a huge risk when you go to trial. Maybe the court gets it wrong, and maybe you're slightly off in what you thought. And then you have this really inconvenient order because the court got it wrong or got it slightly different than you wanted. And you lost all power to make that decision when you decide to go to court instead of settling.
Yeah. And what do you think is probably the biggest challenge for people going through a divorce?
I think the biggest thing is trying to find a way to process properly the emotions of what the divorce is while trying to come up with a way to reasonably settle with somebody who you've got all these emotions tied into, right? Yeah. When you talk about how do you reach a settlement, how do you effectively co-parent, a lot of it is you engage in a lot of the communications that you would be engaging in when you have an effective relationship. And the problem is you don't have an effective relationship. That's why you're getting divorced, right? That's why you're not going to be together anymore. And so it's a major challenge to try to move forward from the very deep and real emotions of what divorce is and finding a way to have the necessary communication that you have to have in order to move forward and be effective to make decisions. And then again, if there's kids involved, to be able to co-parent effectively. It's a very hard transition. Naturally so, for a lot of people to make.
And what do you think it helps the people going through that? Where have you seen the people being successful at navigating through this? What are the keys that you see in their life, or what have they put things in place? Do they have a support group, or do they have, I guess, people that are helping them through the process? Because I know attorneys are not psychologists. That's one of the things that people don't realize, is that I remember asking my attorney, the one attorney I did have during this last divorce, and I said, how much time do you spend counseling your clients? And he's like, all the time, Becky. And but divorce attorneys have lives too, and it's very stressful because you want to get them through that process, and they end up spending a lot of money. But what do you see the people that are successfully, what do they have in their life, I should say, or what do you see?
Yeah, a few things. I mean, the very first thing I would say is therapy, with an actual therapist, right? Not with your attorney as an armchair therapist who, we're counselors, but we're counselors at law. We're not trained psychologists. We're not trained therapists. There are some things that we can provide as like helpful tools and resources for people to go find to do it. But one of those primary ones is therapy, right? I'm a big believer in people being in individual therapy. I'm a believer in family systems therapy, which is kind of hot on the scene now. Very, very in vogue these days.
For kids, you mean?
Systems therapy. What's that?
For kids?
Yeah, yeah. Where the family systems therapist is basically, they're doing it for the whole family.
Yeah.
So for the co-parents and the kids. So they are visiting with everybody and identifying who they need to visit with and how does it need to work, and do people need to be together or then separated apart and bring them back together when appropriate. So it's like dealing with the whole system together.
Yeah.
It's become very, very effective in some of these situations where I really like family systems therapy. So therapy is the number one thing. I mean, the second thing would be your support system that you have, right? People who care for you and love you, that do regardless, but also aren't going to necessarily just be yes men or yes women.
Right. The challenge.
Right? Not going to just sit here and pile on and be an echo chamber for negativity, but somebody who's willing to give some perspective. There's times where people will bring a support person to mediation. And what the mediators, the good ones, will say, and what I'll tell my clients as well, is like, hey, if this support person is here and is being helpful, then they can stay. But if they get to the point where they're not, then I'm going to ask them to leave.
Yeah.
And thankfully, what I found the vast majority of the time is that these support people are actually very reasonable, right? They're bringing a little bit more of an objective approach, helping to kind of reason with this person because there is a very high level of trust with the support person. And I found that to be exceptionally helpful.
Yep.
I think in this day and age where we have more and more disconnection happening because so many more things are with AI or our remote work and all of this, that we're creating more and more disconnection from people, that when we can have this connection and a support person, whether or not it's a best friend or a sibling or even a parent, we can have this level of connection, this level of belonging. Now suddenly we're in a safer space where we can make better decisions because we have this sense of belonging to this group that we're a part of, right? Again, a best friend or a brother or sister or whoever it might be. I find that to be super helpful through this process, is to have a really, really great support person and support group. And something else we see more and more common these days too is support groups. Here at our firm, we've provided a free men's divorce support group and a free women's divorce support group because we find those to be very helpful. You talk with other like-minded individuals who are experiencing something difficult. And you can talk through, like, what are you doing to kind of move past this? What are you doing with your kids? And how are those conversations going? And, they're led and directed by, we do ours with a mental health professional that leads and directs the discussions, right? So they stay on track and we provide helpful advice. And we have one of our attorneys here that does divorce, and he himself is divorced. And so he also helps to provide some context and some guidance in those situations. Those type of support groups are also really helpful.
Yeah, I agree. And I have found that there's not a lot of support for men. That is something else I've talked a lot about over the years, is that men need somewhere to go to be able to talk through the things that they're going through. And I also am a huge believer in support groups. There was a gal actually that I talked to, and she's going to be on my show here in the next couple of weeks, but that's what she does, is she actually works for attorneys and goes and works with the mediators, works with the attorneys, sits there with her clients, gives them that neutral, like, different perspectives like you were talking about, because it is so easy, as you know, because you've been through divorce too, but it's so easy to somehow, because you're hurting so badly, you want people to just go, go after him and do all this, but that is not helpful. That's not what's going to get you to the point where you can think straight and process through those emotions. That just, ends up making things worse oftentimes. So I appreciate that you bring that up, is that find people that are healthy enough to be able to bring different perspectives so that you can have come with more clear thought processes through divorce. Love that.
Yeah.
Love
Yeah. It makes a huge difference. Makes a huge difference for people for sure.
Yeah. Well, awesome. And as we're kind of like, sorry, I'm looking at the time. As we're getting to the very end of it, what is the last couple of things that you would suggest for people going through divorce, or things to consider that maybe we haven't talked about, that you see patterns of that could help them through this process?
I think one of the things is looking for the things that go on during the divorce process that will have impact after. And here's what I mean. When we have people who say have a house, or are looking at alimony and child support, or have these retirement accounts that maybe they're either losing half of theirs or gaining half of theirs, starting the conversations early with other professionals. If you're going to have to sell a home or find a new home, talking to a real estate professional early, finding out what's out there. What could you sell your house for? What's it going to look like if you're trying to buy a new house? Talking to a mortgage officer early, so that if you've got to do some credit repair while you're going through this process, you do it. If you're going to have to refinance to cash out, you start figuring out, like, what could I actually do so that my attorney is more informed when we mediate, to know what's even possible, so I don't set myself up for failure, but also that I can start getting myself adjusted to, okay, am I going to have to go buy a new house? What's that going to look like? What's my new lifestyle going to look like once that point in time comes? When it comes to retirement, right? We refer people to financial planners all the time, because if you're losing half of your retirement, or if you're gaining a bunch that you didn't have before, figuring out what to do with that. How do you now plan for the future that is different than the future you thought you had last year?
Right.
Because it will, right? Retirement will look different now. Now you've got to reset and have a new plan. And so starting those conversations with other professionals early will help inform the process, get better agreements, and then will help for after the process to build for your better future going forward. Because make no mistake, you're building a new future. When you get divorced, you're building a new life. Now start out with intentionality. Start out with like trying to actually build that better life going forward by paying attention to those things along the process.
Which is you bring up a great point, because this is another reason why having an attorney that's very connected in this space is very important, because you have resources and people that you trust that you can send, like estate planning, counselors, support groups, things like that, because it really does take, I always say it takes an army to create an empire, right? And you really are going and starting this whole new life, and being able to reach out to people and say, okay, who do you trust? Who can you give me resources to, and be able to build that new life. And I mean, divorce is not easy. I don't think it's easy for anyone. However, we can grow through it. And it is putting these things in place, knowing your rights, getting the right people, having good lawyers and good mediators and good support, to be able to rebuild your life. And one of the things I always love to emphasize, and we talked a little bit about this before the show started, is that bringing people hope that you're remarried, I'm remarried. We did survive this crazy time, and that divorce is temporary. Oftentimes it feels like it's going to be a permanent thing, but it's just taking it one day at a time, and knowing that you can make this through, and your kids are going to survive. You're going to survive, and just get the support that you need around that. Any last? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think it's important to keep in mind too that like nobody does this perfect.
No.
Right? I was a divorce attorney. I got divorced. Like it's like, oh man, what happened? And I'm co-parenting. My boys with my ex are 15 and 12, and I've got a co-parent on a regular basis. And I see all the like, don't do it this way. And I talk with all these marriage and family therapists, and I see all these custody evaluators, and I still don't do it right all the time. Right? I'm doing my best.
Yep.
And I think that's what's important, is like, we just got to do our best.
Yep.
And we'll mess up, give ourselves some grace, but have that desire to continue to make improvements, have that desire to create better co-parenting relationships and create a better life for yourself and for your kids. And then just continue to do your best, give yourself grace when you don't.
I love that you say that. I always say that all the time. Give yourself grace. Like this is not a process that you're going to be perfect. Do it messy. but be willing to pick yourself back up and
For sure.
keep going, because it really is. This is the last question I'm going to ask you is that how much of this process of going through a divorce is a mindset, and having the right mindset plays a big role in getting through this?
I would say that it's paramount.
Yeah.
And that mindset is not an easy one to get to, right? We've talked about that it's difficult because of the emotions that are there. But when you can bring that right mindset to the table, now you've taken intentionality to build a better life, to come to a good agreement, to effectively co-parent if you have the right mindset, to evolve as you go to get better, right? We're talking about mindset too. When I hear that, and this is probably what you're talking about, which is like a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset.
Exactly.
And that growth mindset is, let me take a look at what these situations are and figure out how I can grow from it. How can I improve upon my situation? I want to grow and learn and be better. I don't want to have this fixed thing here where I'm just always wallowing in negativity and things are going poorly and I'm a victim and I'm blaming others, because that's a pathway to unhappiness.
Yep.
And the growth mindset is a pathway to happiness, where as we're learning and growing and evolving and we're seeking after those things that are positive, and we're having more of that happiness that we're experiencing, because there really is that in life. No matter our situation, we can find that degree of happiness, and taking that growth mindset is going to go a long way into getting us there.
Yeah, absolutely. I used to be an apartment complex manager in Provo, actually, and I used to evict people.
That's a challenge.
I know. I did it for 6.5 years, and I evicted a lot of people. And I'd always say to them when I was evicting them, I would say, look, you can use this opportunity to grow, or you can walk away and be upset and think that the world's against you. But I say that about divorce as well, is that, it sometimes divorce is happening for us, not to us. And that having that different meant going, okay, what am I supposed to be learning? How can I, grow through this divorce instead of becoming a really bitter person? Because it just doesn't make it possible for you to get another relationship. If you want to be in another relationship, I never thought I'd be married again. I don't know about you, but I never thought in a million years that I would be this happily married again. But I love that I kept my heart open to the possible. And I hope people can remember that as well and see that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Ryan. If you're in Utah, you're only licensed in Utah. Is that correct?
You got it. Yep.
Okay. Awesome. So I will have all your contact information at the bottom if you want to reach out to Ryan. Do you do consultations for people?
We do.
Okay.
Yep.
Awesome. So I will put your contact information down there, and then people can reach out to you. And thank you so much for sharing with us your experience and your hope. And thank you for being in this space. I know it's not easy. Divorce attorneys, a lot of people don't realize, is not an easy space to be in. But most people that are here is because they're passionate about helping people. So
it was my pleasure to visit with you. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us here at Divorcing Strong. I'm Becky Sampson, the host, and yet another great episode today, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks for listening to the Divorcing Strong podcast. This episode is sponsored by Only Subpoenas, where we make subpoenas simple, powerful, and 100% compliant. If you're having a hard time getting the information you need to settle for a fair and equitable divorce, let us help you. Whether you're an attorney or you're navigating divorce on your own, subpoenas can uncover the truth, secure the evidence you need, and level the playing field. To see how we can help, book an appointment by visiting our website at onlysubpoenas.com.